Didn't do anything and they got quiet. Picked up the mic.
You're Bill Monroe, that's why.
That's BBB. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Bill Monroe and I'm part of the Special Collections University Archives staff, and I want to welcome you here and the ones online too for this event as we start celebrating the 50th anniversary of the naming of the Walter Havighurst Special Collection at University Archives, and we're really looking forward to our distinguished speaker. So, having said that, I want to turn this over to Dean Conley. We're going to introduce our speaker and then we can start the program. And we'll do questions after.
Thank you, Bill. I would be remiss if I didn't think,
We're making out, leave us alone.
Keep your sunny side.
Yeah. Yeah. Turn your mic on.
Okay.
before I begin, I wanted to start with a message from Frances McClure. Many of you know Frances. She's a little under the weather today, and she sent this to Bill yesterday. She said, "I'm truly sorry I will not be able to participate in the event celebrating the 50th anniversary of the name of the Walter Havighurst Special Collections and Archives. The collections and memories of Walter are very dear to me. Here are a few thoughts. No one could be more pleased or prouder of the new Walter Havighurst Special Collections rooms than Walter Havighurst, a place he brought guests to see and to look at. Special books in this collection, often showing them a little four-edge painted book or a book that would catch their attention. Although the rooms are no longer the same, as a young seaman who always had a book in his duffel bag to read when not on duty, he would still be pleased that his name is remembered with special books. I didn't truly know Walter until I began working in the Walter Havighurst Special Collections a little over 3 decades, over 3 years after the establishment. But we became good friends. Soon he began sitting beside my desk, talking to me about the past, his time as a scout leader in Colorado, a seaman on the Great Lakes, or a more recent trip to Korea, hosted by a professor at Miami University. He talked about his niece, Ruth's nephew, Samuel, and their family from Richmond, Indiana, going with them to celebrate Christmas at the Richmond Hospital, where he played the piano and they all sang for the patients. He took great pride in his students who became writers, and many others. Our conversations were varied, but all a part of the man, Walter Havighurst. One day he sat a rookwood vase on my desk with a lovely white flower with his wife, and said this was his wife's favorite flower, insisting that I keep the flower in the vase as a token. Over the years in special collections, Walter brought other gifts, but nothing as special as his friendship, his kindness, and his thoughtfulness. And I think that this captures what we believe is true about all of our professors here at Miami University, that they bring that thoughtfulness, that caring of their young charges, and more importantly, their scholarly work to ensure that the lives in which we are hoping to change for the better is there always. And we have such a professor today who has that deep commitment to his students, and that's Dr. William Pratt. Dr. William Pratt, I'm going to read very quickly because he sent it to me. William Pratt is a professor of English Emeritus at Miami University, Oxford, Ohio. He served as the author or editor of over 20 books in the field of modern literature. He and his wife, Anne Pratt, translated and published The Influence of French Symbolism on Modern American Poetry by René Taupin. From 1991 to 2005, he served as the secretary of the Ezra Pound International Conference, and in 2015-16, he was president of the Literary Club of Cincinnati, founded in 1849, the oldest continuous literary club in the United States. It's indeed our pleasure to have today Dr. William Pratt.
Thank you for that introduction. And let me thank you too, Jerome, for inviting me to honor Walter Havighurst, who was an esteemed colleague when we joined the English department, and I would say one of the most distinguished members of the Miami faculty. He had published 30 books, mostly on the Old Northwest, which Ohio was part of. He came to Wisconsin, which is also part of the Old Northwest. And so I'd say his reputation was as a historian of the Old Northwest, which was the first wave, you could say, of resettlement of the United States. Walter became a mentor to me, and I'm grateful for many things that he did. One of them was introducing me to Robert Frost. I taught a course in modern poetry, and Walter was a friend of Frost's at the Breadloaf School of Writing in Vermont. And so that they had known each other well. And I remember when he came and he said, as he had said several times, that his friend Walter Havighurst lived and taught at the prettiest American university that ever was. And so that is an often quoted remark by Frost. But as far as our family was concerned, we owe him one of our family reunions, which was a custom in our family every summer. One day he asked me, have you been to Beaver Island? And I said, no, I never have. He said, well, it's in the Upper Lake, Michigan, and I think it would be ideal for a family reunion. So we had one there. It was one of our best reunions. Remember it well. Also, when I discovered that a Tennessean had come to Miami University really back in the old days, and that his name was Theophilus Cannon Hibbett, a remarkable name, and he graduated from Miami in 1852. And so I took this script, which was beautifully handwritten, to Walter Havighurst and said, what do you think about this? So he read it and he said, this is the best student diary I've seen, and I think we should publish it. And sure enough, we did publish it within a few years. And I think it's become one of the standard historical reference books at the university. So I owe Walter a debt personally and professionally. And I'm very glad to be honoring him here in the library with his special room. My lecture is called Miami University, One History, Two Historians. And it recognizes that Miami University has a colorful history, and that there are a pair of excellent historians who have memorialized it. The Academy, as it was called, was chartered on the western frontier in 1809 by the state of Ohio, and has matured for more than 2 centuries into a large modern university with a national reputation. 2 gifted historians have done the honor of telling its story. One, a professor of English, widely admired for his treatment of the Old Northwest, and the other, a historian by profession who taught there's Walter's book, which is the standard history of the university, Miami years, that he kept going, he kept editing. And we know from Phil Shriver's book, Miami University of Personal History, that it begins with a tribute to Walter Havighurst, his predecessor. Quote, in my view, Walter Havighurst, The Miami Years, is one of the finest college histories that has ever been written. But Walter Havighurst had published his book in 1953 and updated it through 1984 in revised editions. Phil Shriver's book was published in 1998, toward the end of his 16 years as Miami president. The books are complementary, each of them readable, well-written, in quite different styles, and they offer twin perspectives on the university that they both serve so well. The difference in perspective is obvious from the very start. I'll show you a picture of Walter Havighurst, which is on the dust jacket of his Miami years in one of its editions. And here is Phil Shriver's book called Miami University of Personal History, which was actually a printed version of his lectures on Miami University history, which he continued. He started when he was in the history department, and he continued but when he became president of the university. The difference in perspective of the two historians' view of Miami is interesting. It's obvious from the start because Walter divided his history into three parts. Part 1, Old Miami, 1809 to 1873. Part 2, New Miami, 1885 to 1969. And Part 3, Our Miami, 1968 to 1984. While Phil divided his history into 14 chapters, from Chapter 1, The Heritage of Old and New England, to Chapter 14, The Heritage of Excellence, a Public Ivy. Walter's focus was on the personal and political activities, which I'll give you some more pictures. This is Phil Shriver. And both of them made a lot of the presence of William Holmes McGuffey. But the focus of Walter's book was on the personal and political activities which contributed to the founding of the university in the Old Northwest Territory during the presidency of James Madison, that far back. Starting with a lively figure in Walter's book of Reverend John W. Brown, a circuit rider he calls the beggar on horseback, who rode his horse from southwestern Ohio all the way to Washington, D.C. to introduce himself to President James Madison at the White House in order to make him aware of the existence of a new college on the western frontier, which he thought deserved national recognition and financial support. His success in publicizing and financing the new university, which was just then being established in the wooded hills on the Ohio-Indiana border, in a township with the venerable name of Oxford, inside the Sims Purchase, a large tract of land granted to John Cleve Sims between the Little Miami and Great Miami rivers. That helped Miami University become one of the first institutes of higher education west of the Allegheny Mountains. Phil Shriver, in contrast, began his history not with the personal and political actions favorable to Miami's future, but with a long tradition of Western universities, placing it in the line of European universities like Oxford and Cambridge, and American universities like Harvard and Yale, which had given prestige to the founding of every new university from the Middle Ages to the modern age. Phil's emphasis was on the intellectual and cultural background of the university as an institution. He traced it from Old England to New England to the Western frontier. Thus, he chose to start his history by placing Miami University squarely within the European heritage of universities, linking it with the Western political and social movements which Walter had put first in his earlier history. Now, Walter Havighurst, The Miami Years is a highly readable, straightforward historical narrative by a writer known for his authoritative studies of the Old Northwest as a region of the country, whereas Phil Shriver's Miami University of Personal History was the printed version of a popular course in Miami history, which he taught for many years, even as Miami president. And it has a conversational tone appealing to student audiences. Walter Havighurst began with the historical facts. He wrote that the first Board of Trustees of Miami University, directed in 1810 by the General Assembly of Ohio, to lay off a town to be called Oxford in the college grant, did so only after, quote, tramping for 2 days through the woods along 4 Mile Creek, which was also known by the musical Indian name Talawanda, and chose as the site of the university in the Oxford Township 640 acres of forest on a rounded hillcrest. In contrast, Phil Shriver wrote that, quote, Miami University did not begin in a vacuum, but as part of a continuum. Centuries of experience led to the formation in medieval Europe of an institution called Universitas, a community of scholars, that is, of teachers and learners, through whom one generation could transmit to a new generation the accumulated wisdom of the past. Walter's account emphasized the efforts of many individuals who contributed to the founding of a new university on the American frontier, while Phil's account emphasized the character of the university as a civilized and civilizing institution, wherever it might be placed, regardless of its country or place of origin. Miami was chartered as a university in 1809, but it did not fully hire its faculty and begin teaching classes until 1824, when a freshman class of 20 students began to work their way through classes in classical Greek and Latin and mathematics, the same curriculum which had dominated European universities since the Renaissance. Even when Miami enrollment rose to 250 students in a few years, the classical curriculum still prevailed, since it was regarded as the right and proper education for future Christian ministers, doctors, lawyers, and leading citizens of the new American Republic. Phil Shriver emphasized in his history how higher education in the 19th century, whether it was Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Miami, was based on the European model of a liberal education, totally intellectual, totally impractical for any kind of gainful employment, except in the educated professions. Of course, in those days, no one needed a college degree to start a business or to join one. So student enrollment was limited to those who had the wealth and leisure to profit from it. And higher education was meant for the few men, and all college students were men until the next century, who were in pursuit of the learned professions, that is, law, medicine, or the ministry, all of which required classical liberal education for admission. Although Miami was chartered by the state of Ohio, every one of the first Miami professors was an ordained Presbyterian minister. No wonder, since most of the early American universities were founded by churches, whether Catholic or Protestant or Jewish, ensuring that religion would be a profound influence on American higher education, as it was on the very origin of the university as an institution in the Middle Ages. The eventual departure of American higher education from Christian classicism to a wide variety of specialties that included literature, history, foreign languages, physical and social sciences, would not occur until much later. One of the leaders in American public education was Miami professor William Holmes McGuffey. And there you see him, the inventor of the McGuffey Readers, a dominant force in American primary and secondary education through the whole of the 19th century and even into the early 20th century. McGuffey was a professor of ancient languages and moral philosophy at Miami, and like his colleagues, an ordained Presbyterian minister. But he had the foresight to see that higher education needed a strong foundation in more basic subjects like reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's, in order to make higher education worthy of the name. The career of William Holmes McGuffey features prominently in both Miami histories because it initiated a broad movement in American education generally, throughout the country. American primary and secondary education came to be based largely on the McGuffey Readers, the first widely used textbooks in American schools. McGuffey eventually produced an entire bookshelf of 12 graded readers, one for each of the 12 years of grade school and high school that were standard in the American educational system. For the majority of Americans whose education ended with the 12th grade and a high school diploma, the McGuffey Readers set a standard of literacy for the whole country. That they should have been produced by a professor of classical languages, who was also a Presbyterian minister, was a guarantee of their quality. It also served to demonstrate the strong influence of classical languages and the Christian religion on American students, no matter how far their education might take them. Credit for hiring William Holmes McGuffey to teach in Miami in the early years of his history is given by both Walter Havighurst and Philip Shriver to the first Miami president, Robert Hamilton Bishop. I've got a picture of here somewhere if I can find it. Let me see. Yes. Have I got it?
Just take the computer, aim it at the computer.
Is this the wrong one?
No, that's right. Aim it towards the computer. Yeah, it is.
There we are. Sorry. He was a graduate at Edinburgh University, and at the time, he was selected professor of moral philosophy at Transylvania College in Lexington, Kentucky, known as the oldest college west of the Alleghenies. President Bishop had heard of William Holmes McGuffey in Kentucky, where McGuffey was teaching school in Paris, a small town not far from Lexington. When President Bishop met McGuffey in 1824, he was impressed by the books in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew that were conspicuous on his desk. President Bishop immediately invited McGuffey to come to the new Miami University in Ohio as a professor of ancient languages. And McGuffey, as a school teacher, was only too glad to accept the offer. When he moved to Miami University later in 1824, he began to develop his own original set of textbooks, which would soon become the celebrated and widely popular McGuffey Readers. Though he taught ancient languages at Miami, he was careful to write his textbooks in standard American English. He wrote them on an octagonal desk, now exhibited in McGuffey House Museum, which McGuffey built in 1833 to house his growing family. If I can get it, yeah, there we are. His home is still the center of the Miami campus, well preserved and maintained as befits the oldest building on the campus. It is a modest two-story federal-style house, quite in keeping with what made the Miami campus distinctive. Red brick classroom buildings and dormitories surrounding the McGuffey House, most of them in the complementary Neo-Georgian style. Walter Havighurst pays homage to McGuffey, noting, quote, "From his terms of teaching, McGuffey knew the somber lessons which introduced children to the wonder of the printed page." And he added, McGuffey was sufficiently old school in the pulpit, but like the children in his schoolrooms, he had grown up in a new green world. And as he walked the campus path, he pondered the teaching of children in the new and spacious West. In preparing his graded readers, McGuffey had the good sense to invite his own children and their playmates to hear him read from them on his front porch, ensuring that his works would appeal to children of all ages, engaged in learning how to read and write in their own familiar, everyday tongue. The name of Miami University has long been a topic of curiosity, coming as it does from a tribe of illiterate Indians, Native Americans, rather than from its predecessors in earlier English and American universities. The explanation given by both Miami historians is that the native tribe of Miamis were indigenous to southwestern Ohio, long before they were forcibly moved westward to a reservation in Oklahoma, where their descendants still live today. The original Sims Purchase from which Miami University was carved was all the territory between the two Miami rivers, the Little Miami and the Great Miami, both of which flowed southward into the Ohio River near Cincinnati. Miami was thus a well-known name in the region, independently of the tribe from which it originated. Its name came by chance from the developers who traveled south from Ohio to prosper in the profitable trade of buying and selling real estate in the rapidly growing Florida towns and cities. It was Ohioans from Dayton and Cincinnati, not Floridians, who brought the Miami name to Florida. Though the Miami name was never native to Florida, the confusion caused by two different Miami universities bearing the tribal name led to a later exchange of letters between two Miami presidents. In Chapter 3 of his Miami University history, Phil Shriver tells the amusing story of how the confusion was never completely resolved. Quote, "It was in the middle 1930s that the president of Miami University, Dr. Alfred H. Upham, received a letter of inquiry. The letter was from the president of the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida, asking him to consider a change of name. The president of the University of Miami in Florida suggested that because his university was in a much larger metropolitan area and was destined to grow rapidly, as it had since it was founded in 1925, confusion about the names could be avoided if Miami University in Ohio would simply change its name. President Upham responded, noting that Miami University in Ohio had been founded in 1809, when Florida was still part of the Spanish Empire, not of the United States of America. He argued quite reasonably there was no Miami in Florida in 1809. Therefore, the University of Miami, founded in 1925, had no prior claim to the Miami name. He proposed that it was the University of Miami, not Miami University, that should choose another name for itself. Of course, no change of name occurred, but it was clear from presidential correspondence that the confusion would never be resolved. Two prominent American universities still claim the Miami name, and their histories continue to demonstrate the vast differences between them, a difference of prestige as well as size. The University of Miami has the more famous football team, but the earlier Miami University has prior right to the Miami name. And because of a succession of highly successful coaches, from Paul Brown to John Pont to Ara Parsegian, with the privilege of calling itself the cradle of coaches. It can also take credit for developing in recent years a more lasting connection with the Miami Indian tribe. To be serious about taking its name from the Native Americans who once inhabited southwestern Ohio, Miami of Ohio initiated an exchange with descendants of the Miami tribe, who live today on a reservation in northeastern Oklahoma. The Miami name, they're out there as well. It was during the presidency of Phil Shriver and with his encouragement that a stronger link was established than the Miami name alone. In his history, Phil Shriver gives particular attention to the cordial exchange that has evolved between what is left of the Miami tribe and the flourishing university that bears its name. A determined effort is being made to revive the spoken language and ceremonies in the original Miami Indians, and living members of the tribe have been invited to the campus as students and faculty members, so that current students could learn from the surviving members of the Miami tribe about the Miami language and customs. As Miami president, Phil Shriver encouraged student and faculty trips to tribal headquarters in Oklahoma, and these are continuing under later presidents, with the result that Miami has become a promoter of strong relations between the Miami tribe of Oklahoma and the university which bears its name. In his history of Miami University, Dr. Shriver notes with satisfaction that starting in 1996, quote, "We have had very strong, very cordial relationships with the tribe and its chief, Floyd Leonard. The chief's son is a member of our faculty. The chief's grandson is a member of our student body. We're proud of the fact that we have a number of Miami Indians with us today." In the Miami years, Walter Havighurst takes note of another unique feature of Miami history. The fact that there was an old Miami which grew to 250 students before the Civil War, but which did not grow but dwindled and finally perished in the aftermath of that war. The cause was attributed mainly to the diminishing number of students from the defeated South, who had made up nearly half of the student body prior to the war. Miami was financed principally by student tuition, and the much smaller percentage of enrollment from southern states made it harder and harder to pay its bills, until Miami was forced to close its doors in 1873. The old Miami remained closed for over a decade, until with financial aid from the state and moral support from its royal graduates, a new Miami would arise from the ashes in 1885. Miami has always benefited from its devoted alumni, who would not allow it to die completely. They cheered when it was born again in 1885 to emerge victoriously as the new Miami, soon to become the much larger and more modern institution that has continued growing ever since, from a few hundred students when it closed to its present enrollment of more than 18,000 students, both graduate and undergraduate. In the transition that took place, Miami evolved from a small liberal arts college to the modern university it is today. The classical liberal arts curriculum of Old Miami had served it well, but for it to be reborn, it was necessary to offer its students something more than Greek, Latin, and math. The new Miami had to grow by offering courses not only in the humanities, but in physical and social sciences, fine arts, business, education. What was reborn in 1885, when the new Miami opened its doors, was a much more diverse curriculum than the old classics could offer, including new specialized subjects like anthropology and physical education. The old, reliable classical liberal arts curriculum was not really abandoned. You could still major in Greek or Latin if you chose, but it was greatly expanded to offer students a wide choice of majors, some highly theoretical, others more practical. A greater range of choices meant a greater variety of students could benefit from a college education. And Miami grew into a modern university without losing its attraction as an established college, where the setting was conducive to teaching whatever young people might be interested in learning. The virtues of a college education on a tree-lined campus, backed by a classical liberal arts tradition, became increasingly important as the new Miami rose from the ashes to be recognized as one of 8 American colleges and universities which were publicly financed, but which had a reputation for rigorous and challenging instruction in all the recognized fields of knowledge. These new premier universities came to be known as the public Ivies because they vied for favor with the privately financed universities known as the Ivy League. The Ivy League was located in the East, primarily in New England, while the public Ivies were distributed all over the country, East and West, North and South. The private Ivies were Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, the University of Pennsylvania, Cornell, all founded early in American history. They were considered the cream of American higher education by virtue of their name, their age, and their highly competitive admission standards. The public Ivies, on the other hand, were created by Richard Mall, a director of admissions at the University of California at Berkeley, who was inspired to write a book called The Public Ivies. The University of California at Berkeley was, of course, one of the 8 universities which, in his view, deserved that name, and the others were equally well known as competitors for the best students in the country. These other public Ivies were the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of Virginia at Charlottesville, the University of Texas at Austin, William and Mary at Williamsburg, the University of Vermont at Burlington, and Miami University at Oxford, Ohio. The broad diversity of regions in which the public Ivies were situated was stunning, in sharp contrast to the relative insularity of the old Ivy League. Both Miami histories are well worth reading, not only for their comprehensive and complementary treatment of an American public university which has distinguished itself among the 2,000 plus universities that have long been cultivating the minds of Americans, and the minds of many foreigners as well, for more than 2 centuries. If we wonder why 2 historians are needed for one history, the answer is there is more to Miami University than one historian could hope to cover, no matter how hard he tried. The fact that both historians are highly competent as well as entertaining writers makes history itself come alive. It is never a dull recital of names and dates, but a colorful portrayal of the people and events which shaped an institution that has thrived and survived through many generations and shown a remarkable resilience to persevere in spite of adversity. Miami, Ohio has proved to be vulnerable, but also indomitable, able to die and to be reborn, all the while serving the deep human desire to make the most of life, however short or long that life might be. Thank you.
We would like to thank Dr. Pratt for those wonderful words about Miami's history. And one of the things that I think is important for us to keep in mind that came out of his remarks today is the fact that this upcoming year marks the 100th year of the first class at Miami University. And that the university during that interceding 100 years has had noble alumni come from its ranks. And like I said, more importantly, it has had a great faculty along the way. We're going to open up a couple of questions for Dr. Pratt that you may have. And I'm going to ask my colleague, Bill Mondro, to help walk the mic. But before Bill comes up and walks the mic, I want to share one thing that I think is also important, and that is the committee who put this event together. I would like to thank them. So if we could give them a round of applause. Our next event, because we just can't stop at one, will be the 22nd of October. And that event will be moderated by Dean Emeritus Kurt Ellison, who wrote a third book on Miami's history during the bicentennial campaign, and we will be joined by 7 faculty members who have used the archives and special collections in their works, and we're really excited to have a very august list of people who are going to join us that afternoon. It's 3 to 5 that afternoon as posted, and we're really looking forward to that. Dr. Pratt, are you open to a couple of questions that
Yes.
people may have? Why don't we do this? Why don't we move your chair here, and we're going to do like Phil Donahue. Have you sit,
All right.
and then I'll have my colleague Bill take the questions.
Work the mic. Questions?
I have a question. Dr. Pratt, you are a noted scholar in Faulkner, William Faulkner. Can you share a little bit about your experience with Faulkner? Did you meet him?
Yes.
Etc.
Well, my last book was a Faulkner profile, and I tried to put into that what I had learned about Faulkner the man. I called it the man, the writer, because my uncle, who was a druggist in Oxford, Mississippi, a town much like Oxford, Ohio, was a friend of Faulkner's. And Faulkner, he would go uptown to the town square and get his mail, and would always stop at the Reed drugstore to say hello and to have a conversation with him. And in fact, if you wanted to buy a Faulkner book in Oxford, Mississippi, you had to go to Uncle Mac's drugstore to get it, because there was no bookstore at that time in Oxford. There is one now, I'm happy to say. But Faulkner lived a life very private to most of the citizens, except the few who knew him well, like my uncle. And that was just fortunate that he was the one who introduced me. And it was very different from meeting Robert Frost. Robert Frost was here and read at Miami to a standing audience at Hall Auditorium. And I remember that well. William Faulkner would not have, he would have been embarrassed to try to do stand up like that. Though he was known widely all over the world. He had won a Nobel Prize in Literature, and so he was internationally known. But he was a very quiet, very private man, and even dodged questions which I tried to ask him, rather clumsily, I'm sure. But I asked him about what book he was working on currently. He said, "I don't know much about books." William Faulkner said, "I don't know much about books. A book is a book to me, but they're all too darn expensive." Well, he made a lot of his income from writing scripts in Hollywood. And so, you know, there are some celebrated films. I Have and Have Not, if you've ever seen that, which is one of the really good American films. It was partly written by William Faulkner. And he worked on others as well. And he would go out there to, you know, when the income was lagging from his books, he would go out there where they paid a handsome salary in Hollywood. And he was well known and very well liked by some of the directors who would choose him if they had the chance to write screen scripts. But there he remained private as well. And I remember one of the stories that they still told about Faulkner in Oxford, Mississippi, was that he brought a horse with him to California, and he rode frequently. He was injured, in fact, very late in life, which probably contributed to his death. But he felt that being a writer was something that was mysterious to many people. And he felt that it was simply a job to do. And he was just very good at, they said, the directors who wanted him, creating characters and creating dialogue. And that's true of all these books, that they're very realistic and very easy to follow. And he had an ear for the tongue. And so that was appreciated in Hollywood and did contribute to making some really good films. But Faulkner, in my experience, was a gentleman, thoroughly, Southern gentleman. And I remember that we sat on his front porch in this big antebellum house in the woods outside Oxford, Ohio. Oxford, Mississippi. I get the two confused. And we sat there and talked. And I could see the pathway up through, there was a gated drive coming into the place, and Faulkner did not like for intruders to be coming in. And so he would often stand up and more or less tell them to turn around and go back if they ever came down his way. But he was certainly a brilliant writer. In fact, the London Times Literary Supplement said, William Faulkner is the greatest novelist of the 20th century in America. And that's quite a claim to make. But I would agree with him. I think he was right about that. Though Faulkner's books are considered by many too difficult. And, nevertheless, the readership has never lagged and still going on. That was a meeting in which I was made particularly aware of the fact that the author is not the man you meet on the street. The author has a voice, and if you read Faulkner especially, you know the voice, and if you like it, you like the voice that Faulkner has. And so it was as though he had a personality which was his own and cultivated it in his own way, but he had an international audience for his books. And I believe that's still true. It should be.
Other questions? Oh.
Dr. Pratt, could you tell us, what year did you start teaching at Miami, and what was Miami like at that point?
Yes, I can. I can remember meeting the dean at that time, who said to us, we asked him, how many students are here? And he said, about 6,000. He said, we consider that's about the right size for a university. Now there are 18,000 plus, and so things have changed a lot. When we came here, Miami was growing. That was pretty obvious. But I think Miami had a reputation, and that was what brought us here, of being the equivalent of a private university, but a publicly supported university. And that's one of the good things about it. Probably the nearest equivalent is William and Mary in Virginia, because to be known as a public-private, you could say, university was to its credit. And I think it has probably brought a lot of students to Miami that it wasn't just regional. It had a national identity. Public Ivy, I thought that was a good term that was invented about the difference between American private and public education. Typically, private universities are better. I mean, the Ivy League are privately financed. But there are a number of publicly financed universities, Miami is one of them, that compete with those Ivy League universities.
Technical issues. That's still to the agenda.
Well, she actually had the same question I did. But Bill, I'll ask you also, golly, you've had a lot of students that you've taught.
What was that?
You've had a lot of students that you have taught
Yes.
over the years, and I'm sure you've kept in touch with some of them.
I have, yes. I get Christmas cards, quite a few still. So I keep up with a few students, of course. They sort of, once they've been away for long enough, they're not any longer in touch, you could say. But yes, and these, many of them became teachers themselves, and all over the country. And so that's, of course, one of the rewards of teaching is that you see another generation coming forth.
We're micless, so just speak up. If you have other questions, please.
Out of all the books you wrote, do you have a favorite?
Out of all the books you wrote, do you have a favorite?
Of all the books you wrote, do you have a favorite?
Oh, yes, I think it would be my last one. You know, I imagine any writer would say that. My last book was my best book. But, no, I'm very happy. Most of them are still in print. If you look at Amazon.com, and I often do, which is the bookseller to the world, really, because you've got Amazon all over the world, and it's very easy to order a book if you see one you like. And I would say most of my books are still in print. I've published 21 books of one kind or another during my career, but Walter Havighurst published 30 books. And so he outdid me by far. I couldn't compete with that.
Excellent question. Other questions? Oh, come on, I know there's gotta be one.
One of the things that we like to say about special collections here in Miami that sets us apart from the Ivy League and the other publics is that we open our special collections up to the undergraduate experience. We bring our treasures out for individuals to touch, to feel, that you don't have to have 15 letters of credentials from professors and doctors and mayors and senators and presidents in order to see those things. Can you hear me?
Yep.
We want you to be able to touch and to feel and to smell an Ethiopian prayer book. We want you to see the value and the richness of the Shakespeare folios. We want you to experience the miniature books that we have and the children's books that we have within our collection. We want to be able to celebrate the second largest McGuffey readers in the world. And we say that because one of the things that we also celebrate is the rich donations that faculty and alumni have made to this university. And Ann and Bill Pratt have done such that. They mentioned Faulkner, and a year ago, Bill came to my office and invited Bill Madro down. And he said, Ann and I are attempting to downsize. Now, I don't know if Randy had something to do with that, but they began to downsize. And he shared with us first editions of Faulkner that were signed, that we now have in our collection. So one of the things that you can do as the dean is you can create awards, or you can give awards to whomever you want to give awards to. But Judith Sessions started an award a couple of years ago, maybe 20. And one of the first individuals that received this award was Ramon Leera, who many of you know from Spanish and Portuguese, who worked closely with our friends up in Special Collections for Usigli's papers, Rodolfo Usigli. And it's one of the rich Mexican playwright collections. Did I get that right, Rachel?
Diplomat and playwright, yeah.
Diplomat and playwright in the United States, in Mexico. And but Bill and Ann have given not only their resources for the collection, but also for the beautiful reading room that we have in Special Collections. And for that reason, we would like to present them the Distinguished Service to the Library Award today.
My goodness.
Thank you, Aaron. And as you can see here, your names have been added to Special Friends of the Miami University Libraries, joining Ramon and Janet Stuckey, as well as Celia Ellison, Tom Boyer, and then the Pratts have been added to that list of individuals. Let's give them a You want Mom to come up, Randy?
Yeah, we want to get.
Okay, we'll get it out.
Yeah.
That works.
At the
think the importance of what we have seen and witnessed today is that we never should forget the importance of books. Around the nation, people are banning books, people are burning books, people are saying that libraries should not provide information to people. And I think as we go through this world, if we begin to burn books and ban books, the world that we know will begin to disintegrate. We will not have the educated community that I think we all want to be and desire to be a part of. And as long as I am here as your dean, we are not going to ban books. We are not going to bar books, and we are not going to burn books, because that information allows us to be a better people, to allow our students to think more critically, to add to the diversity of the community in which we're part of, and more importantly, lay the foundation and the cornerstone for the next generation of scholars. Because we at the Miami Libraries believe that anyone who walks through our door is a scholar, whether or not it's a first-year student who just matriculated last month, or whether or not it's an individual who joined us nearly 5 decades ago. And as we move forward today, may we all celebrate the richness of Miami University, her rich and wonderful history, but more importantly, her bright and shining future. For we are indeed an institution on the hill. Thank you for coming out today. For refreshments outside the door, and Bill has something to say. Oh, I thought Thank you all.
I saw Big Steve working out in the yard there.
To do that to you.